Well, welcome. It's what is today? March the 7th, right?
7th, yes, sir.
Well,
Day.
it's been a busy week in the Senate in particular, and I was just saying to Dustin that I wonder, after hearing Joe Manchin talk on the talk shows this morning, how far to the right moderate is now. That he claims to be the moderate, but uh, I don't know if Franklin Roosevelt or Lyndon Johnson would have recognized him as moderate in this case. But so why don't you kind of flesh out some of the things that you were asking about minimum wage and about whether we're really, are we really trying to get that, or is
On the fight for 15, that kind of thing. Now, of course, they passed this relief bill, and I believe they passed it through reconciliation, correct?
Right.
Right. So they've got this bill through reconciliation, and I've got some notes on that history. But they put in a lot of pork, except the $15 an hour thing. That's the thing that they kind of removed. So it's still, which is another pork done through reconciliation. Just that one's bad and everything else is good. So that any arguments about strategy and things like that are really in bad faith, because they did the thing. They just excluded the minimum wage because they wanted to exclude it. And then
and the additional payments to people with higher incomes for COVID relief.
Right.
They cut out. Somebody pointed out that they cut out all the people who won the election for them in Georgia, all the suburban white voters. They just cut them out. So screw you. Now we got our senators.
Yeah,
you don't get money anymore. We promised you we'd give you money. Now, never mind.
Now, a quick thing on reconciliation, which is kind of this whole thing is about. It's reconciliation, and reconciliation has to do with the filibuster. The filibuster has to deal with having a supermajority in Congress. So the first thing that I asked is like, okay, well, if any party got a supermajority, what would they do? Ask yourself, if the Democrats got 60 senators, and now would they do the things? No, it'd be interesting what your answer is. But the reconciliation has been around since 1974 or something like that, and has been used 25 times, but it's only used for budget bills. So it's basically been used every year. It has been used a lot, and they might tell you it hasn't been used a lot, but only because it's restricted to certain types of legislation. And then the big thing is it's an advice, that parliamentarian thing, it's advice. They have been overruled before, they have been fired before and replaced before, and it's really the Senate Vice President, Kamala Harris, can say, yeah, no, we're still doing this. So these are all kind of excuses, and once you look at who's fighting for what and who's doing what, and you can really kind of tell once you get into the weeds, but the normal population doesn't want to get in the weeds, and the newscasters certainly don't want to show the weeds, because it would show these privileged people not giving you a raise. So this reconciliation thing, it's really about the filibuster and the majority, and how do we deal with Congress when there's that kind of gridlock that we've had in the last 40 years. It's the same old question. And to close also, I was in the mock Congress stuff in school and all these things, and it is not simple getting things through Congress, but what you really highlight where our narrative has to come back into play is it depends on what they want to do. And if it seems like most of the people in Congress want to bring money to their district, not to help people, but to get a better paying job when they leave Congress.
There's one party, and then there's a group of wealthy people who are trying to get everything they can out of the government, period, in the discussion. And the people that are trying to get something done are further divided up into some people who are representatives of wealthy people who want to get everything they can, and then the ones that are there to help out the occasional middle class and poor person people. And so there's not really two parties. It's not a two-party system. It's a one-party system with one hand holding on to all the money that they can get. And you know, I mean, this is my same thing all along. You know, and the effects of money on politics and how it all has been going down for the last 70 years, really. And you know, it hadn't changed. And you know, it's a little move, tiny little shift here and there, depending on somebody, but everybody's in it to get the money. Period. It's all about the money. Give me the money. And
Well, there was a great quote I'll interject for you. Is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour would be a $92 billion raise for 32 million Americans. $92 billion that the United States Chamber of Commerce desperately wants to keep in their pockets.
Yeah.
Support your point.
you know, so yeah, I mean, yeah, and that's who's running things, and that's who certainly Republicans, if we can call them a party. You know, that's what they're basically intent upon doing, is, you know, looting all the money that they can possibly get out of the government, while making sure the government doesn't do anything that causes them to lose money. End of discussion. And that's why, you know, they oppose all. I mean, you know, look what Mitch did happily, happily for the whole time that Obama was in office. You know, I'm the Grim Reaper, and you know, I'm not giving anybody any money. And even when people needed money badly, and you know, in the past, we would have passed something to help them out. No. And he's proud of it. That's the weirdest thing. That you think, how come people in Kentucky don't understand that? I don't get it. You know, it's all about.
I'm all for. I can get behind competing self-interest as long as my interests are also represented. That's my problem. I'm not.
You can't afford the ticket to play this game. You know, that's the deal. I can't afford to play this game. You know, I mean, I'll go vote and never miss a vote. I always vote, but you know, it doesn't affect anything.
One of the things that is striking, particularly in when we have events like this vote this week, is that there seems to be a distinction between what you propose in terms of seeking out the office, you know, what you say to people about why you want to be elected, and then the actual performance on the job. You know, how do you actually perform on the job you're elected to? So in this case this week, what struck me is they were arguing about the additional funds going into in the relief bill, and the Republicans were saying, well, no, it shouldn't be what is it, $1,400 that they were proposing. That should be a lower number. And I thought, you know, I've been in management for a good part of my life, and when you run into a situation like that, you look for a creative solution. You don't, you know, just make it a ping pong game, going back and forth, arguing your bullet points. But where is there a solution? And somebody said this, and I picked up on it pretty quickly. Why couldn't you give everybody $2,000 and then amend the tax code slightly so that when you fill in your taxes next year, it says you got $2,000 from the government. Your income is $500,000. Therefore, you have to pay back that $2,000. Or your income is $20,000. Therefore, you owe no taxes. So in other words, there's a solution sitting right in front of them that would guarantee that people who needed the money got it. So you give it to the people who don't need it and then take it back from them based on their tax returns, where the mechanism is already in place. I mean, that occurred to me, you know, what the hell? On the minimum wage, there's a big difference between minimum wage $15 in California and in Arkansas. You know, $15 an hour in Arkansas, pretty good job probably. In San Francisco, it's starvation wage. So couldn't you index the payment to, you know, the minimum wage requirement to the cost of living index in that region? Well, it appears that that's just too much work. We got to go raise money for our campaign. We can't do all that work in Congress. Does it strike you that way? That it's like you took on
Yeah,
a
that's
job,
it's
we hired you to
you.
manage the fucking government, manage the fucking government, do your job, and don't just keep
Yeah.
campaigning.
Yeah. Well, this is going to this. If anybody's still paying attention, this will further solidify who these people are actually working for, and it's not us.
Yeah.
Because Manchin and I forgot her name, starts with an S, Sir, the lady starts with an S.
Gentlemen.
Yeah, they both campaigned on minimum. They both have many public statements. But once it comes to it, they're against it. So it's again what they say versus what they do, and the whole holding politicians accountable for stuff. It was so odd, and especially coming off the other force the vote movement of like how that operates, and we're scared of it as a populace for some reason. I think that's by design, but they've all been working for this. But now we're into the, my question kind of leads to that. Like, it's very obvious who everybody's working for, and it's not us. But if the Democrats have the majority, even a slight majority, why are we compromising kind of thing? Like, no Republican ever voted for the bill in the first place.
Right.
So why are we compromising amongst Democrats?
No, I think one of the things is it's in a way it's kind of refreshing is to hear somebody say that out loud as the argument. I don't recall the person's name who was arguing before the Supreme Court, but arguing against voter changes in voter registration, because he says if we change it, Republicans will never win. Basically, it creates a disadvantage. Why the hell do you think you're entitled to an advantage? Where'd you get this idea that the Republicans?
Wait, I'm a white man
to have an advantage in the voting rolls. Well, wait a minute.
As we can. Now, I'll throw in a real quick on the minimum wage as we go into the next thing. Is when FDR put this in, it wasn't about a living wage. No. It was about a counter to corporate overreach. And it was really supporting the unions, basically.
Right.
So it wasn't about livable wages, even though that's the moral argument. Today, it was more about strengthening unions and protection against employer abuse. Throw that in there.
Yeah. Well, you've probably seen in film someplace the scene where the workers, usually miners, are lined up, and the overseer comes in and says, "Okay, we're paying a nickel an hour," and people take it because they're afraid not to take it or they will get nothing. So they were driving wages down to the point where it was costing people to work. And so minimum wage was an attempt to put in a floor. It was never intended as a living wage. And the question that came to me in that regard is, how many people do you personally know who are affected by the minimum wage? Are you working for minimum wage, or do you?
Well, mine's a little different now. In Chicago, of course, the minimum is a little higher. I forgot what it is. I'm closer to this. I haven't worked the minimum wage, but I've chosen to work in the nonprofit field, and a lot of them will pay $15 an hour. Now, I have turned down a few jobs that paid less than that. And $15 an hour in Chicago still puts me into a little bit of debt. And I've done it recently several times, and so it does affect me quite a bit. Now, that's 15.
Yeah.
Now, under that, I don't understand anyone who, like, you can work a minimum wage job under whatever it is now, but you need to work 2 jobs and you need to work in a 4-income household. That's how we know the people I serve in Chicago. That's how they do it.
Yeah. Well, aside from a teenage grandson, I don't think I know anyone who's making minimum wage is like $7.25 an hour now. So I don't know anyone personally who's making that little money on the job, except maybe a waitress who's getting, they make less and they get it back in tips and so forth. So the point I was going to make is the issue is not a pressing one for everyone. Getting the payment check from the government, that's something a lot of people have a self-interest in. But raising the minimum wage is one of those principal issues. I think, well, yeah, somebody ought to be paid a decent wage, but doesn't affect me personally, doesn't impact me. So, they tend not to fight for it as hard. We do it reluctantly every few years because we feel guilty if we don't, but it's not something that, people are clamoring in the streets about. I don't recall any protests saying raise the minimum wage. I'm sure there are, but I don't see them. So that's,
well, the poors are working. They can't protest.
Well, that was the other issue, that people in Congress respond to public pressure. And I don't think there's a lot of public pressure on this issue. The people who are getting minimum wage are probably, they don't have time to be politically involved. So they're not.
Well, keep your eye on Amazon and the unionization efforts there, and the union busing efforts.
Yeah.
There is a lot. You're not going to see it a lot on corporate news. There are people making those protests, but a big thing here, I'm going to throw a wrench in this, is a lot of the corporations are starting to pay 15 or more. Amazon and Costco that came in this month, they're doing
as well.
And they're like, this is the argument of lower their taxes so they can pay wages, which they don't do unless they're pressured. They can be. And this comes back to Trump's Jobs Act, Tax Cut and Jobs Act, enabled a bit of that. Now, in my research, I want to really research that bill to see really what's going on, because I'm like, I don't really want to credit the GOP with anything positive. But if that led to Costco increasing their wages, maybe I need to look into this a little bit more.
Who's got the money?
Yeah.
Well, in the interim, all the other stuff, which is, that's, all of that, people talk about the minimum wage more than anything else that I can think of, generally amongst ordinary folks. And yet, if you stop and think about it, they don't talk about that a whole that much. And they usually are out. Folks are out working. They're going to shopping. They're doing all the things that they have to do. And the idea of taking time off to go and raise some ruckus in order to get more money, take something as bad as having to be work. Your choice is you get to work in a mine or you get no money at all. And that's when it starts people to go, well, wait a minute. Because, if you figure that, think about times when you've had low wage jobs. You always used to manage to do a little something on the side to pick up a few other chips, I mean, we do this, and this is kind of how it is. And you find out, well, who's got that? Or, something comes from a store or the businesses, they say, yeah, take some of this. We're going to throw this out, you can have that. I mean, everybody works the system as much as they possibly can. And I mean, from the point of view of the Republican Party, it's a good idea, because then people are not bothering you all the time. Well, you go about your business that really matters, which is giving as much money as you possibly can into the pockets of the richest people. Right. But you got to put some out there to make you, have them leave you alone. Right. That's the motions. We're still, have you ever picketed Mitch's house? And he lives over in the Highlands, right? He lives in the Highlands, which he doesn't, but his house is there. And he will come back to town. The last two times he came back, third time I knew he was talking to some business types. 2 times before that, the paper wrote up him getting a singer from somebody in a very public kind of way. People expressing their utter distaste for him as an individual. And, they've been calling him names for, 4 years, however long he's been there. I don't care. He's got the money.
Yeah. It still amazes me. Just I don't hear anyone in Kentucky say they like Mitch McConnell, and I hear everyone's in Kentucky say no one likes Mitch McConnell. Yet there's still Mitch McConnell. It always befuddled me.
Yeah,
But,
well, what did he do this time? At the last minute, he come up with something to provide a chunk of jobs.
And I've looked into the things where he brings in money into the state, but he only gives it to his network. He's still saying before, it's about doling out the money. That's where the power is.
Well, I don't do it anymore, but
yeah.
No, a big part of his power is controlling the campaign funds for the congressional delegation from Kentucky. He can make or break somebody in Congress.
Well, that's the big thing of parties now. It's not about caucus voting. It's about fundraising.
Oh, absolutely.
And the scandal from this last election was they were promised a bigger pool to do to spend on smaller elections. The national offices took all that money and put it on the national stage, not local stage, to pay off the consultants and the TV networks, and then the people on the bottom row. There was a little hint on both parties of like, do I really want to do this if all my efforts get that money not to me but to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and who not? There's a undercurrent of revolt going in there. Pay attention to, because it's going to be few and far stories in between, but they're very important.
Yeah. I used to give money to the DNC. I haven't in several years. I don't believe in them.
Yeah.
that's wise.
Now, sorry to interrupt, and I'm just I'll be quiet. The workers' rights approach to the minimum wage, I think, is our stronger argument. But one last thing on how this affects us. For me personally, that trickle up economics is what affects me. So as I can get more people on $15 an hour in Chicago, they'll spend more at restaurants and things that the middle class own. And then once those middle class owners have a stronger business, they will donate to my nonprofit more, which means I will have more job security and possibly a raise. So I depend on the trickle up economics.
Trickle up is the right term. Squirt up, maybe.
Careful now, we're getting into different territory. Remember, everybody, the first direct relief checks actually lowered the poverty rate for the first time in forever. And actually, like anytime you get money into the people's hands, it has a larger multiplier effect than into the rich people's hands. So we all benefit.
The related issue there is McConnell and Graham and all these hypocrites are saying that they're now concerned about the deficit, that this is
right.
So I
that's
think,
predictable.
I think people have finally gotten over that. It's like, quit talking about that shit. You don't believe it. You know, when it's tax breaks for you guys, you don't worry about it. When it's giving out money to people who need it, it's so
they're seeing it, and more people are predicting. It's like, well, it's the countdown timer for them to start talking about deficits now.
Yeah.
And everybody was right. Now there's a crazy idea. What about this crazy idea? The majority of, we call them urban workers, so Chicago and those markets, right, happen to also be majority Democrat states. Now they already have a higher wage, right? The majority of people who are going to be affected by a minimum wage increase are in Republican states. And if it's a Democratic proposal, those people in those states might switch parties. What do you think about that?
Interesting.
One question, I did the suggestion that the Republican Party would at any level offer to increase the money to their people who work down at the bottom. Strikes me as absurd.
Well, no, if the Democrats passed minimum wage increase in Republican states,
can get away with it, then they can
Republican voters.
We didn't have anything to do with it, and so but you can have the money.
With government issues, particularly when it comes to funding, it used to be that you could pretty much assume the goodwill of people on both sides. Disagreement was over strategy, but the intention was to do what was best for the greatest number of people. I think we've become so jaded in this, um, in our system of pitting one side against the other, as though we're in a courtroom and we have, we present 2 points of view and one wins and the other loses. We've adopted that as a strategy for government, and that's not what the intention of our government is. The intention is to come to a common agreement. So when I hear Biden talk about bipartisanship, I hope that he means that we're going to reconsider this strategy of, red against blue, and look to a more idealistic form of government where we're trying to do the right thing, and we agree on what, keep people alive, keep them from starving, and so forth, educate them, etc., and that we're having our discussion about what the best strategy is to achieve that. But even when it comes to things that shouldn't be partisan issues, like the pandemic, we make it a partisan issue. It's the only way we know how to think about things anymore is, should we wear a mask or should we not wear a mask? Well, the Democrats say yes and the Republicans say no, so I'll choose my team. Wait a minute. You're talking about your life. Who gives a shit whether the person is red or blue? Is a mask going to save you? No, it's not a partisan issue at all. But we make it that way. And every issue that pops up, there's almost an immediate spin from left and right. So you can tell people, well, this is what you ought to think about that. This is how you ought to think about it. Because if you're a Republican, you have to think this because that's our party line. And I think that whole mindset is what leads us to do stupid things in our government. And I hope that, maybe Biden's capable of this. I don't know. But I would hope that, what I'd really like to see is Joe Biden take Mitch McConnell and go on television and talk about what we're going to do with our government and make sense of it. Don't talk about, how bad the other party is, but what are we going to accomplish here? What are we going to do?
They are never going to do
that. I think we can
never going to do that.
I think we can get there, but agree on where we're going.
Yeah, because then it would be obvious who they work for. Remember, 3 days to pass a corporate liability shield and give out trillions of dollars to rich people, but it's taken them months to figure out how not to give me a check.
Right.
You'd be wasting that money. What would you expect?
Yeah.
Now, here's a question I have. But what would be the minimum that you could do? Well, I'll qualify that. The minimum that would be required to educate people to the point that it makes a difference in what they're going to do with respect to the political situation, i.e. civics.
Mm-hmm.
Only civics done on current 21st century, splash bang on the tubes, whatever things it would take, and how much money would it take to have that up and running? All right, so you have it running in places. Well, and you can do it on a state level. Why not? That's what state level is really the logical place to do it. But I'm just curious because I understand. I had civics as a kid, and we did all. We didn't. This was actually before the. Here I'm Mr. Bill at the Congress thing, dancing. I kind of just thought that was absurd because I got all of the amendments and the structure of the government and stuff like that, because this was at this time, this was in the middle of the Korean War, and they wanted people to volunteer to go out, and of course I was a little bitty kid then, and I wasn't going to go anywhere and do that, but that was what they were doing at that time. And I just wonder if it's something modular that could be put together and delivered to any state or city government that would make a difference. Besides, here's the bottom
in
line.
how people vote or how people
decide how to vote.
This okay, because the thought that was coming to my head was like smoking in restaurants was a good example, where it took a while for people to even consider socially that smoking is bad. It took even longer to consider socially that smoking indoors is bad. It took I don't know what prompted the laws, but once the laws came in, it didn't feel, maybe there were some groups that were doing it, but it didn't feel like people I knew were clamoring for thinking about it, or they just had to react and respond to something. And then the reaction and response was, do I want this or not? You know, a lot of people in the bars were like, I like smoking in bars. And then a lot of other people were like, I don't go to the bars because you smoke. So we got through that. And now it's, well, obviously you don't smoke inside. Even as a smoker, I don't smoke inside. Like there's the social education.
Yep.
I don't know about civics civics education. It's a loaded gun for me because I'm like, everybody needs to think like me, you know? But like, what moves the social education needle, and what do you do with that education? It's. I think it would be more of if somebody said, we need to close down bars that prevent smoking. I think everybody would look at you like you're crazy. Like that's a effective social education. So I'm just reframing the question is all I was doing.
Reframing the question. Well,
when I was growing up, the notion that a black person would be able to go to that bar was equally absurd.